Hi folks, Rob Poyton here from the Innsmouth Book Club. Thanks for joining me today's excursion, which is to Cambridge. Yes, I am back in the Fens. Now, Cambridgeshire and, well, the whole of East Anglia in general has no shortage of supernatural stories, myths, legends, paranormal events and so on. And we can speculate for the reason for this. Certainly the whole area has been inhabited for a very, very long time. Even here in Cambridge, the earliest found farmstead dates back 3,500 years. So we've had the Iron Age, we've had the Romans and Boudica and the Iceni, of course. We've had Anglo-Saxons, the Danes and Vikings, and the Normans. And in fact, there was also a Norman castle built by William the Conqueror in 1068, also just on the edge of Cambridge. Because, of course, at that time, I don't know if it's semi-legendary Hereward the Wake led the resistance against the Normans from his stronghold in the Fens. So we've got all that history packed into the area, but there's also this idea of the Fens as a liminal space, because even when the Fens were cleared, the Great Clearance, obviously that changed the appearance quite a bit, but I think the atmosphere still remains. And you get that sense of it's not quite land, it's not quite sea, it's somewhere in between the two. So it's no wonder that so many myths and legends grew up in the area. And as I said, today I'm in Cambridge. I'll speak about my location in a little bit. We'll just apologise for the background noise. There's a huge building project going on just a couple of streets away over there. Hope that doesn't detract from the atmosphere too much. So Cambridge, or Grunterbridge as it was originally known, was given its charter around the 1120s by Henry I. So again, we've got this idea of a long history in the town, and of course that history is compounded by what Cambridge is most famous for, its colleges. So the oldest college is Peterhouse, just over here, which was founded in 1284. I'm going to be talking about that a little bit later on. And when we think of the people who have attended Cambridge over the centuries, it's such a huge long list. Isaac Newton, Walpole, Wittgenstein, Douglas Adams, Charles Dickens. Incidentally, in 1855, the Ghost Club was founded in Cambridge, which was the UK's first paranormal investigation group, and Dickens was said to be an early member of that. Samuel Pepys, Lord Byron, Stanley Baldwin, Aleister Crowley, Christopher Marlowe, Siegfried Sassoon, the list goes on and on and on. As well as that, of course, there are other interesting people, such as Syd Barrett, a musical hero of mine. Pink Floyd, of course, were formed in Cambridge. T.C. Lethbridge, the famous paranormal investigator, was from Cambridge. And Olivia Newton-John was born in Cambridge, which kind of caps it all, really, which I never knew that before. So, there you go. And, of course, last but by certainly no means least, M.R. James, who was Provost of King's College for a time and was also Director of the Fitzwilliam Museum, which is literally just around the corner. So it's quite strange to think that in this quite small geographical area, all these people existed. All those people were walking these very streets. So with all that activity, with all that history, with all that energy going on in this very small area, it's no wonder that Cambridge itself is full of ghost stories and paranormal activities and reports. Given that when you come here to do this kind of thing, you're very much spoilt for choice, because each college has its own or several ghost stories attached to it. But of course, one thing is it can be difficult to get access into the colleges. So given that, I thought I'd bring you here to Little St Mary's Lane, which is said to be the most haunted street in Cambridge. So I'm going to talk about some of the events that have been reported here. And then just to finish off, I'm going to show you a place that we go from the non-corporeal to the extremely corporeal, but more of that later on as well. I'm actually standing in the churchyard at the moment of Little St Mary's Church, which is at one end of the lane. There's said to have been a site of worship on here going way back into the midst of time. The earliest known records date back to 1207, and in 1352 the church was extensively rebuilt. At the time it was, as well as a parish church, it was the chapel to Peterhouse College just over the back here. Now in 1643 the church suffered some damage. This wasn't down to fire or earthquake or flood or anything else. This was down to the actions of a chap called William Dowsing, otherwise known as Smasher Dowsing, and he was a Puritan iconoclast, and he went around all the churches in the area smashing up anything he considered too Catholic, too ostentatious. And we have a record from his journal that says in this one place he destroyed 60 items. So there was more restoration in the late 19th century, since when the church is largely as it stands now. Although I think there was, just behind me you might be able to see there was like a little extension, sort of meeting room built. I think that was put there in the 1950s. Now, as far as the churchyard itself goes, there have been reports of a large animal being seen moving around the churchyard. And this also ties in with another, not legend pertaining to this particular spot, but one of the most famous East Anglian legends of all, that of Black Shuck. Because it's been said that at the end of the lane here there have been sightings of a huge black hound. Very common myth throughout East Anglia, and certainly up to the north of Cambridge as well, along King's Hedge and Devil's Dyke, lots of sightings of Black Shuck there. And as always with Black Shuck, if you sight him, it's a sign of your impending doom. But in this particular case, in Little St Mary's Lane, apparently if you are a woman of good virtue who is sober and upright and you are walking home alone late at night, the dog is said to actually shadow you and protect you. So, isn't all bad? So I spoke about liminal spaces earlier on, and when it was first laid out or developed, which was believed to be at least in 1300, Little St Mary's Lane was on the very edge of town. So it was the border between the town and the marshland beyond. So already we've got this idea of a sort of pathway or a gateway into another space. Reported sightings over the years include a woman who is seen in 3 different forms. So the same woman, but she's seen as a young girl, as a middle-aged woman, and as a very old lady, which is quite an interesting one. I don't think I've ever heard of the same person being seen in 3 forms like that before. And you can't help but think it relates to that idea of the triple goddess, perhaps, the maiden, the mother, the crone. One house has the sound of a piano playing that is heard quite regularly, and of course there's no piano. And there's also a small girl in Victorian dress who's seen running up and down the street, sometimes smiling and laughing, so she at least appears to be a happy spirit. Most of the houses here now date back to between the 17th and the 19th century. I believe they're all listed buildings, so the street retains a lot of its look and atmosphere from those earlier times. And I spoke about Peterhouse earlier. As I said, the oldest university. Now, there's been lots of ghostly sightings within the college, and also one just on the edge of the gateway in particular, which just backs on to the cemetery here. In 1997, there were a lot of press reports of ghostly sightings within the college, and these came from what were considered respectable, reliable people, including butlers and other staff from the college, and even the senior bursar himself. The main apparition that was being seen and also heard was believed to be Francis Dawes, who was a former bursar who hanged himself in 1789. And the story goes he's actually buried somewhere in this churchyard. So a little bit later on I'm going to see if I can find his tombstone. Now things got so bad that the college authorities organised an exorcism. So this was something that was obviously taken very seriously, which is unusual enough in a modern university seat of learning. And I gather the scientific community in the area weren't too impressed. Nonetheless, they were looking to arrange an exorcism. But this wasn't the first time an exorcism had been arranged at Peterhouse. There was one in the 18th century to rid a student's room of a poltergeist. So that's a little while ago. But then we come up into the 1960s, where there was another series of unfortunate events that led to the gateway here also being exorcised. There was a spate of suicides, 10 suicides of students at the college here, and the reason for this was put down to a malignant entity that was said to crouch on top of the gateway and spread out this atmosphere of despair and darkness. Some people reported seeing this crouching figure, and certainly reports from the time suggest that there was this real atmosphere of negativity about the college. So once again, an exorcism was arranged, which seems to have been successful because, as far as I can find out, there's been no further reports of a figure, and certainly the atmosphere appears to have lightened somewhat. So those are our spectral events. Now, I mentioned at the start about something more earthly. So what I want to show you now is number 5, Little St Mary's Lane. And you might notice what looks like an old pub sign on the front of the building here. That's because this was once a pub. It was called the Half Moon. And from 1915 to 1934, this was owned by Noel Toulon Porter, who was an archaeologist and a sexologist, which is quite an intriguing mix. I don't think I've ever heard of that combination of occupations or hobbies before. The closest I could come was there's a Carry On film where there's an architectural dig going on a campsite. It might be Carry On behind. I'll have to check with Tim because he'll definitely know that one. That was the only connection I could draw. Nonetheless, NTP, as we call him, was very ahead of his time, because what he started arranging at the Half Moon here were meetings where they discussed things like sex education, contraception, homosexuality and so on, which of course was extremely scandalous for the day. In fact, some research suggests that this lane was known as something of a red light district at one point, and in fact in 1971 the Half Moon lost its licence over what was described as licentious behaviour. So who knows? It certainly doesn't have that feel about it now. In fact, nearer to our own time, Stephen and Jane Hawkins moved into that house as well, and in 2020 Jane donated some of the furniture from that earlier time to the Museum of Cambridge. I also found out that in 1962, number 2 was owned by a Colin Wilson. Now, I've not been able to verify if that is the Colin Wilson, author of The Outsider, The Occult, The Mind Parasites and other similar books. I know he was from Leicester. I think he was living in London for quite a time, but if anyone out there does know if that was the Colin Wilson living there, I'd be interested to find out. So there we go, that's my excursion today from Cambridge, Little St Mary's Lane. As you notice, just as I finished, so has the building noise now. That's the way it goes. I hope you enjoyed that. If you do know any more stories about this lane in particular, please do let me know. And also let me know your favourite Cambridge ghost story as well, because there are tons of them. And of course, if you enjoy ghostly and weird literature and film, do take a look at our podcasts, the Innsmouth Book Club, and Strange Shadows, where we examine the weird fiction of Clark Ashton Smith. Also, I'll put the link below. Take a look at our upcoming event in September. We're running a one-day convention in Bedford. That's the Innsmouth Literary Festival. We've got guests, we've got Ramsey Campbell appearing on Zoom, we've got traders, we've got games going on. It's going to be a fantastic day, so please do take a look at that as well. Until next time, be seeing you.